should be good.
Hi, I'm Tom.
Can everyone hear Tom from here?
Can everyone hear me? Okay. So I hemmed and hawed a bit about how I wanted to do this, and since not too many people are overly familiar with UX design, I decided to go more broad than deep. I'm going to start with a little overview on a few of the roles that UX designers play in software development. Then I'm going to move on to user stories, then heuristic evaluations, then a little bit of user testing. Not too much because that's a rabbit hole. So here we go. So exactly what is UX? UX is user experience. It is an umbrella term, or as Corey Lebson puts it, cheesecake. There are many different kinds of cheesecake with lots of different flavors, but they all have cheese. And at the core of user experience design is, the user. The idea is to not start from a blank page, but actually know who your users are going to be and tailor their experience accordingly. One major role is visual design.
Excuse us.
Sorry. Actually, now Twitch is actually seeing it.
Do you want me to start over for Twitch?
If you want. I mean, I don't want to interrupt the flow.
Well, for the Twitch users who are just joining us, I'll go.
Oh, you just like,
So I'm going to give an overview of UX design for the Twitch users who have just joined us. And I'm going to start with the various roles that UX designers play. And the first big one is visual design. Human beings are very sight-focused. So we gain most of our information, especially in software, through looking at things. Very little in audio. In game design, audio comes a bit more heavily to the front. But visual designers generally start from graphic design. They do a lot of layout, they do color schemes, and their goal is to guide users through an experience, be it a website, software, video games. I'm using Mirror's Edge as a game example here because parkour style gameplay doesn't really work in the first person, so their solution was to make everything white and then make the path you're supposed to follow a nice bright red. So you always know exactly where you should be jumping from or should be climbing. Interaction designers, there's a lot of visual design elements in what they do, but they actually think of what they want the user's workflow to be. So if a user wants to book a hotel, they first need to find the hotel site, put in their dates, book it. So there's a very clear progression that they're supposed to take, and the interaction designer comes up with that progression, usually in a storyboard format like you see here. It's a very fluid process. They're always taking in new information. Researchers should always be researching their users and changing to suit their users' needs. Never guess what the user wants, always find out. And so as that information comes in, we tweak these storyboards and then test it again. Human factors is actually an older term that's been brushed under the umbrella of UX design. A lot of human factors engineers from like the 70s and 80s have turned into UX designers by virtue of their trade. Instead of taking the user's mental workflow into account, they take the physical space. So you always want to be considering how the user is working. Are they on their mobile phone? Are they sitting at a desk? Are you building a game for a 5-year-old? You need to, or an elderly person who might need bigger words and visuals to see better. And this is a big part of gaming because gaming sessions can last a while if you look at the proliferation of gaming chairs being sold with full-on speakers and the headrests. It's very important to know who they're going to be, what their physical capabilities are. Things like color blindness is being implemented into various platforms. Nintendo recently released an update for their Switch that allows users to switch to grayscale. They didn't announce why, so they got a lot of flack for that at first, but then they clarified that it's for vision impairments like color blindness, so that way colorblind people can still enjoy their games. And this is the bulk of what a UX designer does. UX is full of research. You do not design in a vacuum. You need to know who your users are, always, through every step of the process. You need to discover who they are. You need to see if they even want your product. And then you need to keep iterating to fine-tune that product. So ideally, the user researcher comes in at the beginning and stays through the whole design process. Oftentimes, they'll just be brought in at the end to test maybe the alpha version, but most likely the beta version. To work out all the kinks. When in reality, they should be brought in right from the beginning, because by the time the alpha and beta come around, there might be too many ingrained problems that would cost a lot of money to go back and fix. They tend to work directly with the user. They design the tests, they sit with the users, and it's a lot of qualitative research. The best way to see how a user works is to watch them. You don't want to ask them a bunch of questions while they're working. You don't want to do anything that interrupts their workflow, because you want to know exactly how they're working in real time. Some sites offer a service where users will record themselves talking through their process, which is a decent way of doing it, but users have a tendency of they talk about what they think they're doing, not always what they are doing. So those are 4 of the roles that UX designers play. There are many more. The UX Careers Handbook is very handy to read if you want to become a UX designer and if you ever plan on hiring a UX designer, because there is a lot of confusion about what a UX designer does, and that book will clarify things greatly. So I'm going to move on to user stories. This might be my favorite part of UX design, because this is where you start you do this at the beginning of the project. So user stories they're an exercise in empathy. You're trying to get into the mind of a potential user. So if you have an idea for a game, who's going to play it? Why are they going to play it? Do they even care that it exists? There are lots of games out there, lots of software, lots of apps. You're not going to ever appeal to everyone. So it's best to figure out who your user is going to be and work accordingly. And user stories are how you set that up. I skipped ahead a little bit. There's some confusion with user stories. You can just sit down and write them, but we go back to the research side, and you want to start the process of figuring out who your users are, and you can look at competitors will be the first place you want to look if you have an idea. Unless your idea is completely and utterly brand new, you probably have a competitor out there somewhere. Okay. So, a couple examples. So identify the game based on this user story. Bill is a hardcore gamer who loves a challenge, even if it takes 100 tries to progress. The sheer act of overcoming is rewarding enough, and he doesn't need exposition getting in the way of the next challenge. He hates casual games and thinks that anyone who can't handle the difficulty curve should just get good. Anyone want to take a gander? No? Dark Souls. Dark Souls is infamous for being ridiculously difficult. They give no tutorial. You're just thrown into a world and left to figure it out for yourself, which is a turnoff to a lot of casual gamers who just want to go on a fun adventure. This one will make you work for it. And I'll do one more example. So Tammy loves retro games like Mega Man and Zelda for their simple and engaging game mechanics. She wants an exploration game that focuses on discovering new areas and finding hidden treasures. She prefers skill development rather than leveling as a means for engaging a greater challenge. Fairly new release in the last year or so. Hyper Light Drifter. Hyper Light Drifter is actually kind of similar to Dark Souls. I think I was stuck on an idea. But it's a pixel art game that uses modern day game mechanics in a retro style game. It borrows heavily from Mega Man and Zelda. So, to get started with user stories, you need to figure out the situation they're in, the motivation, and the expected outcome. So, when I want to play a Mega Man-like game, I want to experience pattern recognition gameplay so I can progress my skill and beat the game. Something as simple as that will be a good starting point for coming up with a user story. So as I said, UX design is a lot of qualitative research. So I recommend first, if you have an idea for a game and you say you do want to make a Zelda-like game, go read reviews on Zelda. Read them with the intention of finding out what the player went into the game wanting, what they felt they got, and how they felt about it. So if they wanted a Zelda-like game, but what they got was Doom, they probably felt pretty negatively about it, and not even sure why they were there. So reviews like that you can probably ignore in favor of the mostly positive reviews with a few negative things. Because, as I said before, you're probably not designing the newest thing out there. You're probably going to be combining a few different ideas, and you're going to want to see where those ideas worked. And user reviews are a good place to start getting the qualitative information that you need to know who your users are. Okay, so this will be the bulk of my talk. Heuristic evaluations they were created by Don Norman, and his book Design of Everyday Things is a great read to learn more about this in depth. But the 10 heuristics I'm going to give you here are taken straight from his website. It's one of those, if it's not broke, don't try and fix it. There's not a one-to-one match with games. It is more software focused, but they translate well and they're a good starting point. The first one is the user needs to know what's going on. They need to see the status of whatever system they're in. So you have a loading bar to let you know that it's loading, don't interrupt it. In games, that's what the HUD is generally for, the heads-up display. You need to know how much ammo you have left. You need to know how much health you have left to make the decision whether or not you need to run or charge. And you can't just be left being shot at. You need to know where enemies are shooting at you from. So there's generally an arrow pointing in the direction of where you're being hit, especially in first-person shooters, where you're not able to have any peripheral vision. Best way to get a user engaged is to match to the real world. If it looks like a door, it should operate like a door. And if the door doesn't work, why is it there? In games, you can match between other games because there's generally a collective language that gamers share. But if you're making a game that you want to appeal to new gamers, you should definitely look around at the real world for your inspiration. User control and freedom. So this one's very software heavy. If a user makes a mistake in a game, they're usually being killed by something. And it's supposed to be a learning experience. So an emergency exit isn't exactly needed here, but depending on how badly you want to punish your users, they should be able to get back into the action really quickly. So continuing from the last save. Autosaves are very nice in this case because some users don't remember to save on a regular basis. They don't want to have to go through a dozen steps just to get back to where they were. They want to get back to where they made the mistake and try again. So standards are very important no matter what you're doing. There's a general controller for console games with different styles, but mostly they serve the same function. PC games usually rely on a mouse and keyboard. Mobile games rely on a touch screen. So relying on standards allows you to take what's already been done. You don't need to reinvent the wheel every time you make a game. If you want to make a game that uses a controller, design for the controllers that already exist. You don't need to make a new one. Error prevention. Again, this one's a little weird for games because errors in games are supposed to lead to some negative consequence so you get to learn from them. But you want to give your users the most tools possible to solve whatever situation they come up with. You don't want to prepare them to go skydiving and then set them up against a mountain to climb. So you can prevent errors by making sure you follow all the other heuristics and make the visual narrative clear, where they're supposed to go, what they're supposed to be doing, a clear tutorial that gives them all the knowledge they need for the game mechanics. And if you're going to introduce new game mechanics, do it before the thing you're introducing kills it.
A small offense on calling Dark Souls having cheap deaths. Because Dark Souls does not have cheap deaths. Kaizo Mario has cheap deaths.
Kaiser Mario?
Kaizo Mario.
I don't know that one.
It's a fan-made mod of Mario where there's so many invisible blocks placed over endless pits.
I imagine that has a few cheap deaths involved.
That is cheap death the game.
I don't know. I took a few too many arrows to the back of the head every time I played Dark Souls. So.
At least you know where those arrows came from. Eventually.
Eventually. So recognition rather than recall. This is very similar to taking from the real world. You don't want your user or player to rely on a textbook of information. If you have to go back and research every time you encounter something new, the game's probably not set up well. So first-person shooters are pretty widespread. You can pick up any first-person shooter and know exactly what you're doing because most companies have perfected how the gameplay works. You know, if you're picking up a Call of Duty game, that those skills will translate pretty easily over to a Battlefield or a Halo. And you know that any enemies that aren't shooting in the same direction as you are probably shooting at the bad guys. So you want to trigger memory that's been ingrained over years of practice. Flexibility and efficiency of use. So again, this one's a bit more software related. Accelerators are things that allow skilled users to not go through a bunch of menus to do a task. So if you think of something like Photoshop, and you want to cut and paste, you can do Control X and then Control V to do that. But earlier users didn't know those shortcuts, so they were going through menus and right-clicking to do it. In games, there's no real accelerators unless you want to use cheat codes. Given the option to skip tutorials for more skilled players is always a good idea. And customizable controls, especially for PC gaming. Real-time strategy games have a lot going on, and really practiced players know all the hotkeys, while a new player won't know any of the hotkeys, so they're searching through all the menus to try and find what they're doing. Eventually, you want your game to teach them the hotkeys so that they can become expert players as well. Aesthetic and minimalist design. You shouldn't be giving your user any more information than they need in the moment. I'm using Alto's Adventure here as an example because it's one of my favorite mobile games. It's a pretty clear interface. Because of the sun, you can't really see. But over on the side, it keeps track of your stunts as you do them as you're snowboarding down a mountain. And that only pops up when you're in the middle of a combo. Things like collecting coins or llamas. The theme of the game is you're chasing after your llamas that got away. The amount of llamas or coins you have collected don't pop up until you collect one. That way it keeps the game clean looking and the player focused on avoiding the obstacles on the mountain. So you always want to help users recognize, diagnose, and recover from errors. You don't want to leave them hanging. You don't want them to look at the screen and wonder why nothing is happening, why the program just crashed. In software that'll require like pop-up dialogues. In games, again, errors, unless there's a glitch in the system, errors usually come from the game itself, dying, doing something wrong. So one of the ways you can do to diagnose and recover from those errors would be to give the player hints. A lot of games, after you've died a few times, you'll be given a hint on what you should be doing. They're not always contextual. Games aren't always good at keeping track of those. But for games, that is the best way to help the player through, especially if they're struggling. Other ways is you can give them the option to change difficulty level if their problem is just the game being too hard. Help and documentation. So we buy most of our games online now, so we don't get these fun booklets that come with the cartridges anymore. But you can include an in-game help section in the menu. The option to replay tutorials to regain information. In big games like Civ 6 or Stellaris that have a lot of mechanics under mechanics, a search bar might even be necessary. But this is again just to give your users an idea, a way out of encountering problems. So I apologize, I'm going a lot faster than I intended. So we're already at user testing. I only have a few quick notes because I touched on a bit in a few other sections. As I mentioned in the user research section, you want to begin testing right away. Prototype it and then put it in front of a potential user, even if it's a brother, a spouse, a parent. Just watch them use it and see how people naturally interact. Let them ask questions, but don't answer them while they're still using it. You can do a debrief afterwards. You want to keep testing iteratively throughout the process of making any software or game. You want to catch as many errors or glitches as you can as early as possible, because oftentimes those glitches can be ingrained into the code and make it very expensive to go back and fix, especially if other processes are relying on that broken code. And most importantly, you want to test real users. Testing within your team is fine, but usually you're too close to it, and you need to take a step back and see how other people who don't know it as intimately as you do take a crack at it. Excuse me. And this is again from Don Norman. You can find most of your errors with just 5 users. You can do more than that if you need more hard data. But if you're just trying to find big errors, big mistakes, 5 users will usually do that. The return of investment on bringing in more users drops off dramatically. It just starts getting really expensive to keep bringing in more people to do the same thing over and over again after you've already found the big errors of your system. And as I pointed out numerous times, I'll hit the nail on the head a few more times here. You're searching for qualitative information more than you are for quantitative data. The quantitative data is mostly going to be demographic information. You want like age, where they live, and what hardware they're using. For UX design, you need to know a lot of that, but mostly you need to know how the user works and operates within your system. So that's a lot of watching people work, which may sound boring, and it can be, but you're not going to get real information otherwise. I ripped through that really quickly. Does anyone have any questions? Go ahead, Tara.
What are some user testing setups that you recommend for various different platforms?
For what?
What are some various different user testing studio setups for various different platforms for cheap? As an example, for mobile games, a lot of there was a company that posted sort of like post-mortem saying they basically have two mobile phones. Well, three. One, the actual touch mobile phone running the application. One, where the mobile phone is recording of the user interacting with the mobile phone. And the last one, recording a video of their facial expression. So, similar to that kind of studio setup, what do you usually recommend for keeping track of user testing? Where are they looking at for various different platforms?
Well, to do it cheap yourself, that's probably the easiest way. I hadn't heard about that until just now. So usertesting.com will have users record their voice while they interact and do a screen sharing, or do a screen capture. Cheapest way is probably just bring them into the studio and sit them in front of whatever platform you're developing for. Obviously, people like getting paid, but if you can reward them in other ways with like gift cards or lunch, especially if it's family. But usertesting.com is really good. The problem with a lot of like survey sites like that is people get so good at like getting through things quickly just to get the $5 at the end of it, that you don't always get the best quality responses. Any other questions?
Are there any ethics standards for user testing?
Yeah. Your standard, I need a file. Like if you're doing like a big study, you need keep information private. You just want to collect the data, not the people. You want to know who they are, but only on the most bare minimum of levels. If you're doing more of an academic study, there's a lot of agencies that you need to go through to get approval. User testing, so long as you're not subjecting anyone to like really strenuous work or trauma, you're getting into the realm of like academics again that way. For the purposes of just collecting your own data for your game, as long as you're not advertising how poorly they're doing or anything like that, or like shaming them, you just want to bring them in and get them to use your product. But yeah, there is a suite of like ethics out there as well. I didn't include them here. If I do a talk that goes more in depth on the testing side, so bringing in a lot of that information too.
I've watched people interact with my prototype at the Art Center here, and wondered if I should intervene to help them or just watch them struggle and figure it out themselves.
Watch them struggle, definitely. It sounds cruel, but you won't know if the problem you gave them is solvable unless you let them solve it.
what would you do in a situation where they're stuck on like, let me word it differently. What would, in a situation where they are stuck on, say, the first few levels because of a certain and very minor puzzle, and you really want to see how well they do on the later levels, what would you recommend encouraging them to get to the later levels? Do you just say, open up the cheat menu, or do you still watch them struggle until they give up? Because there are like very real scenarios where you really want to know, or you really want data on how well they do on the later levels, at the very least, so that you're getting more information out of them.
Well, with a level by level game like that, it's probably okay to intervene and just push them to the next level if you want to have data on every level from every user. But seeing where they get hung up is very valuable.
Right, I would definitely take notes on exactly where they're doing that.
But so long as you gave them I guess a fair shot at getting through it themselves, but especially if you're running short on time and you need them to move on, I'd say it's okay to help them, to push them to the next level, just because some data is better than no data. And if you just let them stay on level 2 out of 5, you'll never have data on 3, 4, and 5.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I got my question back. All right. Do you have any resources that you recommend for when to use, say, a button versus a toggle versus radio button, so on and so forth? So, like a list of all the UI elements and when you'll want to use them, kind of resource, as well as how those are utilized in different mediums. So PC versus web versus mobile versus VR versus etc.
There is this site that started doing standards, and I'm brain farting on the name at the moment. When I send you the slides, I'll send you that link as well.
Cool.
I'll look it up. But there is a collection of standards. Yeah, I don't know. I'd just be guessing.
Okay.
Sorry. Any other questions?
Well, so you actually tested a game on that, or was it 2 games? I can't remember working it out.
Yeah.
So did you use those principles then? Like the 5 testers and...
Well, I didn't watch too closely. I mostly put those up for entertainment's sake, but unless they were struggling to get the game going, I generally didn't intervene. Because I'd like to know when people at least walk away from the game, then I can kind of see where they left off. Like, the maze was too long, or something like that.
How drastically does the process of running up user stories, of doing research and so forth, differ when you're making a standard game of a specific genre versus a completely non-standard out-of-the-world game? So specifically, I guess for me, I'm more interested in the out-of-the-world part.
Well,
I would assume most of it is similar.
It's pretty similar, but if you're making something really different, it gets to be, well, you'll be writing a lot of guesswork at first. So if you're going to want to start with your idea and imagine the type of person who's going to play it. You'll take a guess, you'll write the story, and then you'll try and find someone who matches that story as much as possible and let them play it. If they play it and they hate it, you need to rethink. So you'll be doing a bit more testing to find your demographic than having a clear idea of who they are going in.
Interesting. Okay. Makes sense to me.
there's no more questions, I apologize for the brevity.
No, it was good.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for doing this.
By the way, as always, we are looking for anyone who's interested in teaching these sort of courses. Again, we already have next month selected, but if you have a topic that you'd like to talk about, feel free to contact Rico over there, as well as me, and we'll be more than happy to have you on the list.
Are we still live? You got a last thing.
Oh, I just turned it off.
Just, oh yeah, and